The year was 1886, or perhaps it was 1887. Time in this part of the Arizona Territory, rubbing up raw against New Mexico, had a way of blurring. It measured itself not in calendars, but in the depth of the dust and the height of the sun. In that year, the dust was king. It was a fine, golden grit that coated everything, settling on the cracked lips of the land and the parched throats of the few people who clung to it. The sky was a vast, bruised blue, aching for a rain that never came. The wind was the only preacher, and its sermon was a long, dry sigh that carried the scent of yucca and baked stone. Through this silence, two sounds fought for dominance. One was new the distant, iron scream of a steam locomotive, carving its way through ancestral earth, a promise of progress to some and a death rattle to others. The other sound was ancient, a thin, reedy melody from an Apache flute, rising and falling like the memory of water. It was a sound of longing, a fragile prayer for the land itself. Mercy Quinn knew that dust intimately. At 19 years of age, she felt as if it had settled permanently in the creases of her heart. She was Anglo-Irish stock, with hair the color of wheat just before it burns, and eyes that held an unsettling honesty. She had grown tall and strong, but she moved with a quietness that came from trying to take up as little space as possible. She had never been in love, had never been kissed, had never had a single day that belonged wholly to her. Her life was measured by the moods of her stepfather, a hard, devout man who saw the world in terms of burdens and obligations. Mercy, with her quiet dreams and her inability to contribute a man's labor, was his heaviest burden. He had told her so, many times, his voice flat with the righteousness of his disappointment. "You are a punishment girl," he would say, not in anger, but as a plain statement of fact, like noting the lack of clouds, a trial sent to test my piety. Mercy scrubbed his floors, mended his clothes, and cooked his meager meals, her hands raw and chapped. Her piety, she felt, was tested daily by the simple act of holding her tongue. She owed him filial duty. The good book said as much. But inside her, a different voice whispered. It whispered of freedom. It whispered of the mission school in Eden Draw, a place she had only glimpsed, where ladies and clean. Dark dresses taught children to make sense of the black marks on a page, to read, to write her own name and have it mean something. The thought was a secret, painful luxury, like hoarding a sip of cool water in her cheek. She was terrified of the life her stepfather planned for her to be married off, traded like livestock to some lonely, hard-handed farmer who would see her not as a wife, but as a solution to his own burdens. Miles away, hidden by the heat shimmer in the stone, a man named Nantan watched the land breathe. He was in his late 20s, a Chiricahua Apache warrior. He wore buckskins, not out of defiance, but out of practicality. They were the color of the earth he walked on. Nantan was a name of respect, but he carried it with a heaviness that belied his age. He had once worn the blue coat of the United States Army. He had been a scout, his sharp eyes and knowledge of the shifting trails valuable to the very men who had taken the land his people were born from. He had left them. The reasons were his own, a knot of disagreement and fractured honor that he did not care to untangle for anyone. He had seen too much, understood their ways too well. He knew their maps, their telegraph wires, and their insatiable hunger for straight lines. Now, he walked his own path, his Honda. He lived by the teachings of the elders, by the whispers of the gone, the mountain spirits. His respect for tradition was the compass by which he moved. His internal conflict was as sharp as his knife. He had a duty to protect his community, the small, scattered bands that still held to the old ways. But he also knew the cost of bloodshed. He had seen what the repeating rifles and the Gatling guns could do. His past as a scout was a shadow he could not shake. It made him an outcast to some of his own people and a traitor to the soldiers. He carried the weight of knowing both sides and belonging to neither, his loyalty only to the integrity of his ancestors' bones, which rested in the earth the railroad now clawed at. The nearest hub of this new world was Eden Draw. It was a border town in every sense, perched precariously between the mapped territories and the vast, untamed wilderness. It was not a town of laws so much as a town of agreements. The law belonged to the Cross Spur and Company, the railroad that fed the town its supplies and its purpose. It belonged to the merchants who set the prices for flour and blasting powder. And it belonged to the small, sun-bleached church that offered salvation in exchange for rigid obedience. This fragile ecosystem was patrolled by two forces: the official, bored garrison soldiers from the nearest fort, and the unofficial, eager bounty hunters who drifted in and out, smelling opportunity. A land rush was on, not for gold, but for the land itself. The railroad's law was simple: what it needed, it took, and if it could not take it, it bought it, often with paper that was worthless or with promises that dissolved like sugar in a summer storm. The tinder for the fire was a place called Willow Wash to the railroad men. It was a data point on a map, an inconvenient dip in the landscape that required leveling, a cheap source of water and passage. To the Apache, it was a sacred hunting ground, a place where the spirits rested, a living part of their memory. Cross Spur and Company, through its chief agent, Raylan Pike, wanted Willow Wash. And Pike was not a man who asked twice. Pike was a creature of the New West. He wore a city suit even in the choking dust, as if his starched collar could hold the wilderness at bay. He never raised his voice, never sweated. He simply gave orders, and they were carried out by his chosen instrument, a man named Briggs. Briggs was the second in command of the local militia, a brutal, simple man who understood violence as the purest form of negotiation. Pike's plan was simple: buy the land cheap, and if it could not be bought cheap, make it so that the current inhabitants were no longer a concern. These forces pressed in on Mercy Quinn. She felt the harsh reality of her world closing the small space of her dreams. Her stepfather spoke more and more of his debts at the mercantile, debts held by men who answered to Raylan Pike. She saw the calculations in his eyes as he looked at her, his only asset. Her fear of a forced marriage became a cold, solid thing in her stomach. She prayed to a God she was no longer sure listened, her belief in simple goodness cracking under the strain. For Nantan, the pressure was the steel track itself. He watched the survey crews drive their stakes into the earth, a violation that made his teeth ache. He remembered his service, the things he had done to prove his loyalty to a flag that was not his. That shame was a bitter taste. Now, the elders spoke of the railroad's path. It aimed directly for the resting place of their ancestors, the sacred caves in the shadow of the Black Mesa. To defend it meant war, a war they could not win. To do nothing meant losing their soul. He had to find a way to honor his people without dooming them. The sun bled out across the horizon, staining the dust clouds a deep, painful gold. The whistle of the last train of the day cried out, a lonely, mechanical sound. From the canyons, as if in reply, came the thin, heartbreaking melody of Nantan's flute. It was a song of memory, of a land that remembered everything, even the things its people were forced to forget. And in her small, dim room, Mercy Quinn heard it, though she did not know what it was. She only knew it sounded like her own heart, trapped and aching, longing for a home she had never known. The fire started 2 days later, not with a match, but with a lie. A small pack train, loaded with silver ore and supplies for a distant army outpost, was winding its way through a narrow pass near Willow Wash. These were not wagons, but a string of 20-odd camels, a failed experiment by the army, now sold off to private freighters. Their shuffling, ungainly gait was silent on the sandy trail. The attack was precise and brutal. It came from the high rocks, a volley of shots that took out the 2 guards before they could even lift their rifles. The cameleers, unarmed men, scattered into the brush. The attackers descended, not with the high, yipping cries of a war party, but with a grim, focused silence. They were dressed in mismatched pieces of hide and cloth, their faces streaked with ochre and ash paint, a crude imitation of Apache war markings. They worked quickly, cutting the packs from the groaning, spitting camels, shooting the animals that resisted. One of the men, his face hidden by a bandana, paused to check the body of a guard. He nudged the dead man with his boot, a heavy, hobnailed boot, the kind a railroad man or a soldier might wear. He grunted to his companion, his words muffled but unmistakably English. They gathered what they could, set fire to the rest, and rode off. Not on agile Apache ponies, but on shod mules, leaving behind a scene of chaos designed to tell a single, false story. News of the massacre reached Eden Draw by that evening, carried by a surviving cameleer who, miraculously, worked for a freight company owned by a subsidiary of Cross Spur and Company. For Mercy Quinn. The fire reached her house that same night, though it had a different name. Her stepfather, Abel, sat at the rough-hewn table, a single piece of paper laid out under the weak yellow light of the oil lamp. He had been to the mercantile. He had not returned with flour. He returned with a solution. "He is a good man, Mercy," Abel said, his voice flat. He did not look at her. He looked at the paper. "A God-fearing man, owns his own land. He is willing to take on your keep." Mercy's hands, which had been kneading dough for the next day's bread, stopped. The flour turned to paste on her skin. What man? Mr. Dobbs, from the dry farm over on the flats. He has been without a wife for 2 years. He is willing to forget the debt. The cold, solid thing in her stomach, the fear she lived with, suddenly turned to ice. Mr. Dobbs was a man twice her age, with gray, damp hands and eyes that lingered. The debt. "My debt at the store," Abel said, a hint of impatience entering his voice. He finally looked up, his eyes holding the familiar disappointment. Mr. Pike himself oversaw the arrangement. "He owns the store, and he owns the note. He has agreed to cancel my entire balance for the season's food and seed in exchange for this." He tapped the paper. It was a formal document, a marriage commitment. His signature was already on it, a thick, black scratch. "No," Mercy whispered. The word was small, but it was the loudest sound in the tiny cabin. Abel's face darkened, not with rage, but with the weary finality of a judge passing sentence. "It is done. You will be respectful. You will be obedient. It is your duty to this family, to the man who has fed and sheltered you." "You are selling me," she said, her voice gaining a strange, thin strength, "for seed." "I am saving us," he snapped, his piety cracking. "And what are you to do? You are 19 years old, with no dowry and no prospects. You read your Bible and you dream of things that are not meant for you. Mr. Dobbs is a kindness I did not expect." "I will not," Mercy said. She wiped her hands on her apron, her entire body shaking. "I will not be his wife." Abel stood, the chair scraping loud against the wood floor. He loomed over her, a shadow of righteous anger. "You ungrateful girl, you are a trial. You have always been a trial. I have tried to beat the willfulness out of you, and I have failed. You are a punishment from God upon this house." His words, the same words she had heard all her life, struck her like a physical blow. But this time, they did not just wound her, they broke the chain. She looked at him, her honest eyes finally empty of any plea. "Then I will remove his punishment from your house." Before he could react, she grabbed her thin shawl from the peg, her small, worn Bible from the shelf, and the last of the bread she had just baked. She was out the door and into the darkness before he could even call her name. She ran. She did not know where, at first. Then, the instinct for survival, the only one she truly owned, pointed her east, toward the faint outline of the mesas. Her aunt, her mother's sister, lived 2 days' walk from there, in a small dugout near a dried-up creek. It was a desperate hope, but it was the only one she had. She walked all night, moving through the cold desert air, the stars her only witness. By morning, The adrenaline had worn off, leaving only exhaustion and the deep, throbbing ache of her life. She was a pariah, a runaway, a woman with nothing. She was so focused on the ground, on placing one aching foot in front of the other, that she did not see the riders until they were nearly upon her. There were 4 of them, led by Briggs. He sat his horse with a brute's confidence, his militia badge catching the morning sun. He held up a hand, and his men fanned out, surrounding her. "Well now," Briggs said, his voice a gravelly drawl. He spat a stream of tobacco juice, the brown spittle landing near her feet. "Look what we found. Little Mercy Quinn, out for a morning stroll." Mercy's heart hammered against her ribs. "I am on my way to my aunt's house, sir." "Are you now?" Briggs grinned, a humorless expression. "Funny thing, we are out here looking for trouble. Seems you might be, too." His eyes raked over her, cold and assessing. "There was an Apache raid late yesterday. Killed 2 men, stole a heap of supplies. We are conducting an investigation." "I know nothing about that," Mercy said, clutching her Bible to her chest. "That is the thing. See," Briggs said, leaning down from his saddle, his voice becoming confidential, menacing. "We got word you were sympathetic, talking about how the railroad is unfair. Now, a girl goes missing from her home the very morning after a raid. It looks bad. Miss Quinn, it looks like maybe you were running to meet someone, or maybe running from someone you told a little too much to." "It was a lie, a twisted, senseless trap. That is not true. I left my home. It was a private matter." "Everything is a private matter until it is a legal one," Briggs said. "And we are the law out here. We are going to have to ask you to come with us. For your own protection. Of course, to help with our investigation." He motioned with his head. "We need to know what you saw." It was not a request. It was an arrest. Mercy realized with chilling certainty that he was not trying to protect her. He was trying to silence her, or worse, use her as a pawn in this game he was playing. This game that had started with the camel raid. He was pressing her for information on a raid he knew she had nothing to do with, to force a false confession, to create a witness. "I will not go with you," she said, her voice a reedy whisper. Briggs laughed. "I do not think you have a choice, girl." As one of his men dismounted to grab her, a shot echoed from the ridge high above them. It was not a bullet, but the sharp crack of rock striking rock. A small avalanche of stones and dust cascaded down the cliff face, startling the horses. "What in the hell?" Briggs yelled, fighting his spooked mount. Up there, another man shouted, pointing, "Saw a flash." "It is them," Briggs roared, his suspicion instantly becoming fact. "It is the Apache. They are doubling back." He drew his pistol. After him. Do not let him get away. 3 of the men, eager for a fight, spurred their horses up the narrow, winding trail. Briggs hesitated, looking at Mercy, then at the disappearing riders. Greed won out. "You stay put," he commanded, before wheeling his horse and thundering after his men, leaving Mercy alone in a cloud of settling dust. She did not wait. She scrambled into a narrow fissure in the rock, a small canyon opening that was barely wide enough for a person. She ran, slipping and sliding on the loose scree, until her lungs burned and her legs gave out. She collapsed behind a large boulder, gasping, her entire body shaking with terror. She heard a noise, not the thunder of hooves, but the scuff of a boot. She froze. It was not Briggs. A man stepped out from the shadows of the rock. He was tall, thin, and filthy, with a greasy beard and the dead eyes of a vulture. He wore a patched Union coat and carried a skinning knife, a bounty hunter, one of the jackals that followed the railroad. He was smiling, his teeth brown and broken. He must have been trailing the patrol, waiting for scraps. "Well, looked here," the man slurred. He was drunk, even at this early hour. The smell of cheap whiskey rolled off him. Briggs done left his rabbit behind. Mercy pressed herself against the rock, her throat too tight to scream. "Do not you worry, little rabbit," the man whispered. taking a step toward her. He raised his knife. "I will not take you back to him. I think I will just keep you for myself." He lunged. It was over before she could even blink. There was a shadow, a blur of motion from the rocks above, a sound like a striking hawk. The bounty hunter stopped, his eyes wide with surprise. He made a choking sound and crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Standing over him was a man. He was unlike anyone Mercy had ever seen. He was tall, but he seemed to be made of the earth itself, all sinew and quiet intensity. He wore buckskin leggings and a simple cloth shirt. His black hair was tied back with a leather thong. He held a smooth, heavy stone in his hand, the one he had used to strike the bounty hunter on the back of the head. It was Nantan. He had been tracking the patrol since dawn, having found the tracks of the raid himself. He had seen the mule shoes, the deep, heavy prints of American boots, the entire clumsy fabrication. He had seen them corner Mercy, and he had created the diversion, a simple but effective rock slide. He had not intended to intervene further. His code was to avoid them, to observe, to protect his own. But then the bounty hunter, the straggler, had stayed behind. Nantan did not kill if he did not have to, but he would not watch this. He looked at Mercy. His face was impassive, his dark eyes revealing nothing. Mercy stared at him, the terror from the bounty hunter seamlessly transferring to this new, silent figure. She was shaking so violently she could barely stand. She saw the paint on his arms, the knife at his belt. He was one of them. The raiders. The killers. "Please," she choked out, sliding down the rock into a heap. I did not, it is me. I am a curse. I bring trouble to everyone." She was babbling, the words her stepfather had beaten into her coming out in a torrent of fear and shame. "I am a punishment. Please, just make it fast." Nantan watched her for a long moment. His expression did not change. He had heard the patrol. He understood what they were, and he understood what she was, a tool they were trying to use. He looked at the bounty hunter on the ground, then back at her. He said nothing. He simply bent down, picked up the canteen she had dropped in her panic, and held it out to her. Mercy flinched, but his hand remained steady. Slowly, her shaking fingers reached out and took it. Nantan gave a single nod, pointing up the narrow canyon. "Your aunt's house is that way," he said. His voice was rough, quiet, his English accented but clear. "Stay to the high rocks. The patrol went south. They will not find you if you are quiet." He turned to leave, a shadow disappearing back into the stone. He was a dozen yards away when a small, dark object, snagged on a thorny bush, was pulled loose from his belt. It was a small charm, woven from dried yucca fibers, a simple, tight knot. He did not notice it fall. He was gone. Mercy sat for a long time, the silence of the canyon ringing in her ears. The bounty hunter at her feet groaned, but did not move. Finally, she dragged herself to her feet. She looked in the direction he had pointed. Freedom. Then she saw it, lying in the dust, the small, woven charm. It was nothing, a piece of dried grass, but it was the only proof she had that the moment had been real. She picked it up, her fingers closing around it, and tucked it deep into her pocket. By the time the sun was high, the rumors in Eden Draw had taken on a life of their own. The Apache raid was on everyone's lips, but Raylan Pike, speaking in concerned tones to the town elders, had added a new, terrible detail. A young, innocent white girl, Mercy Quinn, had been taken from her home, kidnapped by the savages. The word spread like wildfire. Apache captured a white girl. The men in the saloons grew loud, their fear turning to rage. The women in the mercantile clutched their children. The tinder had been set. Pike had just struck the match. The wind picked up, howling down from the mesas, kicking the dry, red dust into biting clouds. It whipped around the corners of the buildings in Eden Draw, carrying with it the distant, oncoming thunder of the iron rails, a sound like a declaration of war. The lie took root and sprouted steel. The next morning, a new train arrived at Eden Draw. Not a scheduled freight, but a short, heavy consist. It was a security train, funded by Cross Spur and Company in response to the kidnapping. It hissed to a stop, and men disembarked onto the platform. They were not soldiers in uniform, but a rough collection of hard cases. Men with repeating rifles and pistols worn low, their faces hardened by sun and cynicism. They were mercenaries, hired by Raylan Pike. Briggs was there to meet them, his militia badge seeming to shine with a new, dark authority. He spoke quietly with the men's leader, and then his own orders were clear. He had been given the mandate he wanted to clean out Willow Wash. The manufactured threat of the raid and Mercy's abduction had given Pike the perfect excuse to escalate. Mercy reached her aunt's dugout 2 days after her escape, half-starved, her feet blistered and bleeding. Her aunt, a woman worn thin by the same harsh life that had ground down Mercy's mother, pulled her inside with a cry of relief that quickly turned to terror. "Oh, child, what have you done?" her aunt whispered, bolting the rough wooden door. "Abel was here, not an hour ago. He came with a man from the company." Mercy's heart stopped. A man. "He said they were looking for you, that the Apache had taken you. We told them no, you were not here. Then—" her aunt's eyes filled with a familiar, hopeless dread. "Then they knew we were lying." Abel brought the paper. Mercy. The marriage paper. The small, suffocating space of the dugout seemed to shrink. A shadow fell across the door, and a sharp rap echoed. It was not Abel. It was a man in a clean, dark suit, the kind Raylan Pike wore, and beside him stood Mr. Dobbs, his damp-handed presence a physical thing. "Ma'am," the man in the suit said, "not to Mercy, but to her aunt. We know she is in there. Send her out, and we can conclude this business." "She is not for sale," Mercy's aunt cried, her voice thin. "That is not how we see it," the man said calmly. He produced a different paper. "This is your supply contract with the Eden Draw Mercantile. You provide laundry services for the railroad crews. Your son, young Thomas, is employed as a water boy. All, of course, run by affiliates of Cross Spur." He let the words hang in the air. Mercy's cousin, Thomas, a boy of 12, peered out from behind a curtain, his eyes wide. "It is a simple matter," the man continued. "Miss Quinn signs the agreement provided by her stepfather, a legal and binding family arrangement. If she signs, this contract is renewed, with a bonus. If she refuses, well, the company cannot, in good conscience, continue to support a family that harbors fugitives, or those who sympathize with those who attack our lines. You will be cut off by sundown. Thomas will be dismissed. You will have no credit, no work." Mr. Dobbs shuffled his feet, his eyes fixed on Mercy. This was the trap. This was the truth of her punishment. It was not a divine curse. It was a human one. Her very presence, her refusal, would doom her aunt and cousin to starvation. Her filial duty, the chain she had tried to break, had just wrapped itself around the throats of the only family she had left. Her aunt looked at her, tears streaming down her face. She said nothing. She did not have to. "I will sign it," Mercy whispered, the words tasting like ash. The man smiled. "Excellent. We will return at dawn with the justice of the peace. See that she is ready." They left. Mercy sat on the dirt floor, the night collapsing around her. Her aunt and cousin were silent, their fear a tangible thing in the small room. She was 19 years old, and her life was over. She was a trade, a solution, a burden passed from one man to another. But as the hours passed, something else sat with her in the dark. It was the memory of the canyon, of the man who had not hurt her, who had simply handed back her canteen and pointed the way. And it was the small, hard knot in her pocket, the yucca charm. She thought of the lie, the camel raid, the kidnapping. It was all connected. A net to catch not just her, but the land itself. If she signed, she was agreeing to the lie. She was becoming part of it. Just before the first hint of gray light touched the horizon, Mercy Quinn stood up. She was trembling, but her hands were steady. She took her worn Bible. She touched the yucca charm in her pocket. She looked at her sleeping aunt and whispered a prayer for forgiveness. Then, for the second time, she ran. She slipped out of the dugout and into the pre-dawn chill. But this time, she was not just fleeing. She had a purpose. She was not running from Abel or Dobbs. She was running toward the truth. She had to prove it. She had to prove the Apache did not queue-up, did not raid the camels. She did not know how, but she knew it was the only thing left. Miles away, on the high, flat expanse of Black Mesa, Nantan watched the same sliver of dawn. He had been still for an hour, his eyes on the horizon. Then he saw it. Not the thick black smoke of a train, but a thin, deliberate plume of blue-white smoke from a distant ridge. It was a signal, a call. He was at the meeting place, a circle of weathered stones. Within the hour, an elder, his face a map of the land itself, was waiting for him. The elder did not waste words. "They have put their stakes in the ground," the elder said, his voice like stones grinding together. "The iron line, it follows the dry creek." Nantan's blood went cold. Willow Wash. "It does not stop at the wash," the elder said, and his eyes met Nantan's. "It cuts through the breath caves, through the place of our ancestors." The Lang Mo to Tien, the burial site. It was not just a desecration, it was an execution. It was an attempt to kill their memory, to sever their connection to the earth. Nantan's past service as a scout, his shame, it all burned away, leaving only a cold, hard resolve. His first stop was the site of the camel raid. He had to see the lie for himself, to read the story the ground told. He found Mercy there, at the mouth of the pass, just as the sun broke free of the earth. She was standing over the scorched remains of a camel, her face pale. She was trying to read the tracks, but she was lost, overwhelmed. She saw him and flinched, her hand flying to her pocket, clutching the charm. "You," she breathed, half in terror, half in relief. Nantan ignored her, his eyes scanning the ground. He knelt, tracing the print of a hobnailed boot, the clear, sharp line of a shod mule. He saw where the bullets had come from. He saw where the attackers had waited. It was all there, a clumsy, arrogant story. "They were not my people," he said, his voice flat. "I know," Mercy whispered. "I am here to prove it." As she spoke, a new smell reached them, carried on the morning breeze. It was the smell of death, fresh and sour. Nantan was moving before she finished, his body silent as a hunting cat. He crested a small rise, and Mercy followed. Down in a shallow ditch, hidden from the main trail, was a body. It was a white man, dressed in the rough clothes of a railroad laborer. He had been dead for less than a day. He had been shot, but that was not all. An arrow, an Apache-style hunting arrow, was protruding from his chest, planted there after his death. His body had been arranged, staged, just like the camel raid. It was another lie, another reinforcement of the story Pike was telling. Mercy stifled a cry, her hand flying to her mouth. This was what the mercenaries were for. This was the proof they needed to wipe out Willow Wash. Nantan looked at the man, then at the arrow. His face, usually so impassive, contorted for a brief second in a spasm of pure, cold rage. This was not just a lie. This was a violation. They were using the symbols of his people, his sacred tools, to commit murder and theft. His honor, his very identity, was being twisted into a weapon. Mercy turned to him, her fear suddenly eclipsed by a desperate, clear-eyed resolve. "You have to help me," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "You can read this. You can read the ground like a book. I need proof. I need you to teach me. I need you to show me, so I can show them." Nantan looked at her, a white woman, small and shaking, but with a fire in her eyes he had not seen before. She was part of their world, the world of steam and steel and lies. "Why would I help you?" he asked. "Because I can talk to them," she said, the words tumbling out. "I know their ways. I can go to the priest in Eden Draw. Father O'Rourke. He is a good man. He will listen. They will not listen to you." She took a ragged breath. "But they might listen to me. If I bring them proof they cannot deny, I will be your voice. Just show me how to find the truth." He looked at the desecrated body, then back at her, a thongon, a translator. Not of words, but of truth. It was a risk, a terrible one. But the alternative was to let this lie stand, to let the tracks roll over his ancestors' bones. He made his decision. He nodded. "Once. We walked for 3 days." He said, "It was not a question. We follow these tracks. We do not trust what we are told. We trust only the footprints." Mercy let out the breath she had been holding. She was terrified. She was allied with a man the world called a savage, on a quest that would likely get her killed, but it was the first time in her life she had ever made a choice. "We trust the footprints," she agreed. The pact was sealed, not with a handshake, but with a shared glance over the body of a murdered man. The shape of the conspiracy was no longer a shadow. It was solid and real, and it had just begun to bleed. Two strangers, united by a lie, began their long walk toward a truth that was buried even deeper than the dead. The ground was a page Mercy had never been taught to read. Nantan was a harsh teacher, not because he was unkind, but because he was silent. He did not explain. He pointed. He would stop, his body going still, and touch a finger to a mark in the dust. "Here," he would say, using a word she did not know, but his meaning was clear. "Look." She learned to see. She learned that the tracks of the raiders' mounts were not the small, neat, unshod prints of an Apache pony. They were the deeper, heavier, metal-edged ovals of shod mules. "Ladeo," he said, touching the print, a word she half recognized. "Mule." "They make a sound," Nantan said, striking a rock with a piece of metal from his kit. "The horse of your people, the Ladeo, they talk to the stone. My people's horses whisper to the earth." He led her to the cold ashes of a campfire, the one the staged raiders had built. He sifted the gray dust through his fingers, his face impassive. He held up a small, dark flake. "This is not our tobacco," he said. He pointed east. "This is from a store, sweet, heavy." He knew the smell from his time as a scout. It was the kind the railroad men smoked in their pipes. He taught her to move, to place her feet to leave less of a trail, to walk on stone instead of sand. He was teaching her his invisibility, and in doing so, he was forced to see her. She was a clumsy student, her skirts a liability, her boots loud, but she did not complain. She watched, she learned, and she endured. On the second day, the sky turned against them. The wind, which had been a dry sigh, became a raw, screaming thing. The air, which had been clear, turned a solid, suffocating yellow. A sandstorm. It came on them with the speed of a charging bull, a rolling wall of grit that erased the sky and the ground. Nantan grabbed her arm and pulled her into the shallow lee of a rock overhang. It was barely a shelter, just a dip in the stone. He pulled his blanket over their heads, creating a small, dark, choking tent. The wind howled, a physical force that tried to rip the heavy wool from his grasp. Sand forced its way in, stinging their skin, filling their mouths and eyes. Mercy pressed her face into her arms, trying not to breathe the grit. She was terrified, but it was a different kind of fear. It was not the fear of a man's hand. It was the fear of God's. This was primal. This was the earth trying to scour them clean. They stayed there for hours. Mercy felt her water, her life, being wicked away by the dry, hot air. Her thirst was a torment, her throat closing. When the wind finally began to ease, just a fraction. Nantan pulled the blanket back. The world was new. The landscape had been wiped clean, the dunes and drifts altered. All tracks were gone. Mercy's lips were cracked and bleeding. She was dizzy, the world tilting. "I need water," she rasped. Nantan looked at his canteen. It was less than a quarter full. He measured it with his eyes. He looked at the sun, now a pale disk in the hazy sky. He knelt and drew a circle in the new-fallen sand. He placed a stick in the center. "We wait," he said. She watched him, confused. He was not looking for water. He was looking at the stick. He watched the shadow it cast. "You measure time," she whispered. "I measure water," he replied. He pointed to the shadow. "When it touches this line, we drink, not before." He was rationing their survival, using the sun as a clock. He was sharing his knowledge, his honda, his way. He was teaching her how to survive not just the men, but the land itself. They walked on, their trail now fresh and vulnerable. The storm had driven them off their planned route, into a part of the valley Mercy had never seen. It led them to a ruined homestead, a small adobe house slowly melting back into the earth, its corrals long since broken. An abandoned farm. A small movement at the window, a flicker of white, made Nantan stop. He put a hand on Mercy's arm to halt her. He whistled, a low, soft call, the sound of a canyon wren. A child's face, thin and brown, peered out. A girl. She could not have been more than 10 years old. She was mestiza, her blood a mix of the land, Spanish and Indian. She looked at them with the terror of a trapped rabbit. "It is all right," Mercy said, her voice gentle, instinctively moving in front of Nantan, showing her own face, her own gender. "We are not here to harm you. We are lost." The girl, Maria, did not speak. She lived here, a silent witness to the empty valley, surviving on what the land and the ruins provided. She watched them, her dark eyes moving from Mercy to Nantan. She was afraid, but she was also curious. Mercy took a small piece of her bread, saved from her flight, and held it out. "We are hungry," she said. The girl finally slipped out of the doorway. She took the bread. She looked at Nantan, at his buckskins, his knife. Then she looked at Mercy. She pointed, not at them, but back up the trail, in the direction of Eden Draw. She made a motion, putting her hands to her face, drawing lines of paint. Then she pointed to her own patched calico dress. She made another motion, a swapping, a changing. "What is she?" Mercy began. Nantan was still, his focus absolute. "She saw them," he whispered. The girl, Maria, nodded. She ran back inside her crumbling home. When she came out, she was holding something small, a single silver earring, tarnished but beautiful, worked in the Spanish style. She pressed it into Mercy's hand. She pointed again, up the trail, and repeated her pantomime, the painted face, the swapping motion. Then she pointed to the earring. Mercy understood. The girl had seen the raiders. She had seen them change. She had seen the man who led them. And this earring, this evidence was his. Or it had been dropped by him. Maria backed away, the bread clutched in her hand. She had given her testimony. She vanished back into the shadows of the adobe. They were a mile from the homestead when the voice cut through the stillness. "That is far enough, Apache." It was Deeks, the bounty hunter. He had a surprisingly good rifle, and it was aimed directly at Nantan's chest. He was perched on a rock above them, his face a swollen, purple mask of rage from where Nantan had struck him. "I figured you two would be sniffing around," Deeks spat. "The runaway girl and her red pet." Nantan did not move. He simply shifted his weight, his eyes on Deeks, calculating the distance. "I am gonna take you in, Apache," Deeks said, his grin ugly. "There is a new bounty on any warrior outside the reservation, and a special one on you. The one Briggs says is leading this whole mess. And the girl, well, Pike will be very happy to get her back. He started to scramble down the rock, his rifle still leveled. He was confident, too confident. He was a man used to hunting staggered, drunken targets. He was not prepared for Nantan. Nantan moved like a snake. In 2 silent steps, he was at the base of the rock. As Deeks's boot hit the ground, Nantan's hand shot out, not for the rifle, but for the man's wrist. He twisted, a sharp snap of bone and ligament. Deeks screamed, dropping the rifle. Nantan's other hand, holding the smooth, heavy stone he always carried, struck Deeks at the temple. Not hard enough to kill, but hard enough to send him staggering. Nantan's knife was at his throat before Deeks even understood he had lost. "No!" Mercy screamed. Nantan froze. He looked at her, his eyes cold. The killer's look she had not seen before. "He will follow. He will bring the others." "We cannot," she pleaded, moving between him and the cowering, whimpering bounty hunter. "We are not them. We are not murderers." Deeks was clutching his broken wrist, his face pale with terror. "It is Mercy," Nantan said, his voice flat. "He is a snake. We kill the snake before it bites." "It is not mercy. It is murder," she said, her voice shaking but insistent. "My whole life, I have been told what is right by men who do what is wrong. If we kill him, we are no better. We are just killing." Her logic was simple, absolute, the logic of her faith, her core. It was the only thing she had. Nantan looked at her, at this strange, fierce woman who was willing to die for a man who had just tried to sell her. He looked at Deeks, who was a pathetic, broken thing. He slowly, reluctantly, lowered his knife. Mercy let out a sob of relief. "Tie him," she ordered. "Tie him and leave him. He will be found by his own, but he will live." Nantan did as she asked, his motions efficient and angry. He did not agree, but he obeyed. He bound Deeks' hands and his good ankle with a leather thong, securing him to a heavy, sun-bleached log. He was helpless, but he was alive. Deeks watched them, his eyes wide with a strange mix of hatred and disbelief. Mercy had saved his life. The girl he was hunting had saved him from the man he was trying to kill. The world was upside down. They walked on, leaving him to his fate. That night, their fire was small, barely a handful of glowing embers. The incident with Deeks had left a heavy silence between them. Nantan was cleaning his knife. Mercy was stitching a tear in her skirt. "Finally," Mercy spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "He called me a punishment, my stepfather. He said I was a trial sent by God." Nantan stopped his work. He looked at the fire. "He said it so many times. I believed him." She continued, the words coming out in a painful rush. "When I ran, I thought I was bringing a curse on my aunt. When the patrol found me, I thought it was my fault. And today, when that man, Deeks, when he found us..." She looked up at him, her eyes shining in the faint light. "I thought I was your punishment, too, that I was the bad luck you had found." Nantan was silent for a long time. The ways of his people were not the ways of hers. He did not have the soft words of a preacher, but he had his own truth. "My people," he said, his voice low. "We have song lines. They are the paths our ancestors walked. We sing them, to remember where the water is, where the food is, where the holy places are." He looked at her, his gaze direct, intense. There is a story in one song, about a woman who was lost. She thought she was a shadow, a nothing. She walked until her feet bled, and she laid down to die. But a man from another clan found her. He did not see a shadow. He saw the water she was carrying, though her skin was dry. He saw the food she knew how to find, though she was starving. He leaned forward, the firelight catching the planes of his face. The song says, he saw her right. A person is not a punishment. A person is only a treasure that is not yet seen, or a person is a burden. If you look at them wrong, it is in the seeing. Mercy stared at him, the weight of his words settling over her. A treasure that is not yet seen. It was the kindest thing anyone had ever said to her. Nantan looked away, back at the fire, as if embarrassed by his own words. He had to change the subject, to return to the earth. "The men," he said, his voice hardening again. "Briggs, the mercenaries. They will march soon. I have seen the telegraph. I have seen the supply wagons." He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pouch. It was a railroad freight manifest he had found near the tracks. "They bring blasting rock, TNT." He traced a line in the dust. "The tracks go here. Briggs' men go here. The blasting rock goes here." The lines converged. They converged on Willow Wash, on the sacred caves, on the tombs of his ancestors. "It is all one," Mercy whispered, the full, cold shape of the plan finally clear to her. "The raid, the killing, the mercenaries. It is all to clear the land, to blow it up." Nantan nodded. The attack was not just on his people. It was on his past, his future, his gods. Mercy reached into her pocket. She pulled out the small, dark yucca charm he had lost in the canyon. She held it out to him. "You drop this," she said. He looked at it, then at her. He did not take it. She pulled something else from her other pocket. It was a new charm, woven in the same style, but her work was clumsy, the fibers uneven. She had been making it in the dark, in the dugout, in the shelter of the rock. "I made this," she said. She held it out. It is not right, but the fibers are strong." She offered it to him. He looked at the old charm in her one hand, the new one in her other. He understood. This was an exchange, a trade. He took the new clumsy charm from her. He left his original one in her palm. Exchanging charms, exchanging responsibility. Mercy closed her hand around the small, hard knot he had made. It was warm from her own skin. Far in the distance, so faint it was almost part of the wind. A sound began, a low, rhythmic pulse. It was the sound of a drum. A single, deep voice calling from the Apache camps, calling the people to council. The night was blue-black, the stars were cold, and the war had begun. The drum sound led them high, past the canyons, to a place the rock itself seemed to hold its breath. It was the Mescalero Stones, a natural amphitheater of giant, wind-carved boulders balanced on impossible points. In the center, a low fire burned, illuminating the faces of 30 or 40 Apache. They were Nantan's people, or what was left of them. He entered the circle, and Mercy walked behind him. A gasp went up. Voices murmured in sharp, angry Chiricahua. A woman, barely more than a girl, was in their most sacred meeting place. A young man, his body tense with muscle and anger, stepped forward. His name was Ethon, and his eyes were hot. "Why is this?" he demanded, pointing not at Nantan, but at Mercy. "You bring her here. The White Eyes is your time as a scout not yet finished." "She is not a prisoner," Nantan said, his voice quiet but carrying in the stone circle. "She is a witness. A witness to what Ethon spat. To the land they steal, we do not need a White Eyes to tell us the earth is bleeding." "We need her to tell them," Nantan replied. He turned to the elder, the man he had met on the mesa. "They have staged a murder. They have used our arrows to defile a dead man. They plan to use their black powder to break the tombs." A fierce debate erupted. The younger warriors, led by Ethon, argued for a raid, for blood, to attack the railroad crews, to kill Briggs, to meet fire with fire. "We have hidden long enough," Ethon shouted. "Are we men, or are we shadows?" The elder let the anger wash over him, his face as still as the stones. When the shouting died down, he finally spoke. His voice was like the dry rustle of leaves. "The earth remembers our steps," he said, his eyes finding each man in the circle. "It remembers the blood. If we shed blood in anger, we stain the ground. The land will cry, and it will not forgive us. We will become the thing they call us. He looked at Nantan. We must talk, but they do not hear our language. I will go, Mercy said. The words left her mouth before she could stop them. Every eye turned to her. She was trembling. A small, pale figure in a circle of men who saw her as the enemy? I will go. To the priest in Eden Draw, Father O'Rourke. He is a good man. He will listen. Nantan spoke. She will be our voice. She will carry our truth to their priest. She will ask for a meeting. 3 sides, us, the town, the railroad, in the light. The council was silent. It was a desperate, strange plan, but it was the only one that was not war. The elder nodded slowly. Let her go. Let the priest hear the truth. Mercy walked for a full day, arriving at Eden Draw in the dead of night. The town she had fled now seemed like a fortress. She moved through the alleys, a ghost in her own town, terrified of being seen. The rumor of her kidnapping meant any sighting would bring the militia down on her. She found the rectory behind the small adobe church. She tapped on the wooden door, her heart hammering. A light came on. The door opened a crack, revealing the sleepy, worried face of Father O'Rourke. He was a man of middle years, his Irish face kind, his eyes tired. Child, he whispered, squinting at her. Mercy Quinn, Mother of God. We thought you were— I am not, she said, her voice a desperate plea. Please, Father, let me in. I am not kidnapped. I am in terrible trouble, and the whole town is in danger. He pulled her inside, bolting the door. In the small, lamp-lit room, surrounded by books. She told him everything. She told him about the false marriage, the staged raid, the shod mules, the Eastern tobacco. She told him about the murdered laborer, the planted arrow, and she told him about the plan to dynamite Willow Wash, to destroy the Apache tombs. He listened, his face growing pale, his hands gripping the wooden cross on his desk. He was a man of God, but he was not a fool. He had seen Raylan Pike's operations. He had seen the greed. I believe you, Mercy, he said, his voice heavy. This is a mortal sin, a sin of avarice, leading to a sin of blood. Nantan, the Apache leader, asks for a meeting, Mercy said. With you, with the town. He wants to show the proof. He wants to stop this before a war begins. Father O'Rourke nodded, his resolve hardening. Yes, a meeting. I will arrange it. I will speak to the magistrate. I will speak to Pike himself, if I must. We will have this in the open. He looked at her. You are a brave girl. Mercy, God has given you a terrible burden. I am just trying to be seen, right? Father, she whispered. He gave her bread and a little water. Go back to him. Tell him I will send a word. Go, and God walk with you. She slipped back out into the night, her heart lighter. She had a powerful ally. As she crossed the main street, sticking to the deep shadows, she paused. A man, standing in the dark alley across from the rectory, lit a cigar. The brief flare of the match illuminated his face. He was not a townsman. He was one of the mercenaries from the train. He had been watching the rectory. He had been watching her. The meeting was a trap, Pike already knew. She ran, a cold dread propelling her back to the wilderness. She met Nantan at the ridge where they had agreed. She told him about the priest, and she told him about the spy. Nantan's face darkened. He will not meet. He will ambush. He looked at the trail they had planned to take. They will be waiting. He chose another path, a high, narrow game trail that wound along the canyon rim. We moved fast. They had been moving for an hour. Nantan in the lead. He was silent, angry at the white man's duplicity. Mercy, her eyes now trained to see the unnatural, was walking behind him. She had learned to watch not just the ground, but the air. She saw it first, a flicker of something that was not rock or leaf. She stopped, grabbing Nantan's arm. Wait, she breathed. He froze. What? There, she pointed. A thin, dark line crossed the path, almost invisible. It was a wire, a fuse, pulled taut between two boulders. It was set at ankle height, perfectly placed to catch a man moving quickly. Nantan knelt, his eyes tracing the wire. It led to a loose pile of rocks. Tucked beneath them was a bundle of 6, 7, 8 sticks of dynamite. It was Briggs' work, crude, brutal, and effective. Mercy felt sick. This path, this was Nantan's path, the one he would have taken. He knew you would come this way. He knows my old ways, Nantan said, his voice a low growl of fury. He was looking at the wire. Then he looked at Mercy, but he did not know my new one. He carefully, gently disarmed the trap, his hands steady. He held the bundle of dynamite, the power of the white man's progress in his hand. He looked at it, then tucked it carefully into his own pack. They were still shaken when they heard the scrape of a boot on the gravel below them. They ducked behind the rocks. Mercy peered over the edge. It was Deeks. He had gotten free. His broken wrist was tied in a dirty sling, his face contorted with pain and rage. He was not hunting them for money anymore. He was hunting them for revenge. He was tracking them, his good hand holding his rifle, his eyes on the trail. He was moving slowly, but he was moving. Mercy looked at Nantan. He had his knife. Deeks was exposed, vulnerable, looking at the ground. She saw Nantan gather himself, a predator preparing to strike. This time, he would not be stopped. "No," she whispered, but Nantan was already moving. Mercy did the only thing she could. She picked up a heavy stone, the kind Nantan used, and scrambled down a different path, getting below Deeks. "Mr. Deeks," she shouted. He spun around, startled, raising his rifle. But in that second, Nantan was on him. He hit Deeks from the side, sending the rifle flying. They rolled in the dust, a tangle of limbs. Nantan, stronger and faster, was on top, his knife at Deeks' throat. "I told you," Nantan hissed, his face inches from the terrified bounty hunter. "The snake." "Stop!" Mercy cried, running up. "Nantan, no!" "He will not stop," Nantan roared, the raw fury of the day, the spy, the bomb, the endless pursuit, finally breaking through his calm. "He will follow us until we are dead." "I know," Mercy shouted, tears streaming down her face. She was standing over the two men. "I know, but we are not him. I will not let you be him." She looked down at Deeks, who was wheezing, his eyes wide with the proximity of his own death. "We will tie you up again, Mr. Deeks," she said, her voice shaking but hard. "We will tie you, and we will leave you, and if you follow us again, we will tie you again, and again, because I will not have your blood on my hands. I will not let him have your blood on his." Nantan stared at her, his arm trembling with the need to strike. He looked at this woman, who had faced down his people, who had walked into a spy's trap, who had seen a bomb meant for him, and she was still, impossibly, holding onto her strange, soft, ironclad faith. He lowered the knife. He got off Deeks, his chest heaving. He turned his back, unable to watch. Mercy found the rope Deeks himself was carrying. She tied him, her knots firm. She tied him to the same scrubby mesquite bush whose pollen had saved their lives. Deeks watched her, his one good eye full of a strange, twisted confusion. "You are crazy," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You are both crazy." "No," she said, finishing the last knot. "We are just tired of this." She left him there and walked back to Nantan, who was sitting on a rock, his head in his hands. That night, there was no talk. The fire was low. The silence between them was not one of peace, but of tension. Nantan was wrestling with the warrior he was, and the man she was asking him to be. He took his knife and a long, dry stalk of yucca. He began to carve, his motions precise, scraping out the dry pith, cutting holes with the tip of his blade. He worked for an hour, the only sound the scrape of steel on fiber. When he was done, He had a flute. He held it for a moment, then passed it to her. She looked at it, confused. "Breathe," he said. She put it to her lips. She blew. A horrible, airy squawk came out, a sound like a dying bird. She flushed, embarrassed. "No," Nantan said, his voice rough, but not unkind. He touched her fingers, moving them over the holes. From here, he touched his chest. Not from the head, the sound must be honest. From the center. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs, and blew again. A single note, reedy, thin, and wavering, came out. It was not beautiful, but it was real. It was a clumsy but honest sound. A small, tentative smile touched her lips. He nodded, a flicker of warmth in his own dark eyes. The next morning, they were back on the trail of the dynamite. They had to find the source. They found where the wagons had stopped, near the site of the staged murder. The area was littered with tracks, the broken remnants of crates. "They were here," Nantan said, sifting the dirt. Mercy was looking at a piece of a crate, half buried in the sand. Something was stuck to it. A small, damp square of paper. She pulled it free. It was a freight tax stamp, and on it, in clear black letters, were the initials CS cross spur. Beneath it, a line of print, Cincinnati Freight Office. "Nantan," she said, her voice electric. She held it out. He took it. This was not a footprint. This was not a story. This was paper. This was the white man's proof. This was the one thing they could not deny. This was the solid evidence. "The priest meeting is a trap," Nantan said. "I know," Mercy replied, her mind racing, the pieces clicking into place. "So we do not go to the priest. We do not go to the shadows." She looked at him, her eyes burning with a new, dangerous idea. "Tomorrow is market day," she said. "Everyone will be in Eden Draw. The farmers, the merchants, the families, and the company lawyers." "They will kill you," Nantan said, seeing her plan. "They cannot," she said, clutching the tax stamp. "Not in front of everyone. We will not go to them. We will go to the people. We will stand in the middle of the street, in front of God and everyone, and we will show them what we have found." It was a declaration of war, but of her kind, not his, in the open, with witnesses. Nantan looked at the small, paper stamp. He looked at her. She was no longer a burden, no longer a punishment. She was a leader. "Right in the middle of the crowd," he said, agreeing. Market day in Eden Draw was a symphony of chaos, a fragile truce between the wilderness and the railroad. Farmers, ranchers, miners, and merchants gathered in the single, wide, dusty street. The air was thick with the smell of animals, fried dough, cheap whiskey, and the ever-present grit. People shouted in English, Spanish, and a half-dozen other tongues. Tents and rickety tables lined the street, offering everything from horsetack to tinned peaches. Into this chaos, two figures walked. The town did not see them at first. Nantan moved with a liquid grace that slid between the gaps in the crowd. Mercy Quinn walked beside him, her head high, her face pale but set with a terrifying resolve. She was no longer the disappearing girl. She was a woman walking to her own execution, or her liberation. The crowd parted around Nantan as if he were a ghost, a ripple of hushed whispers and frightened stares. He was an Apache, a warrior, walking bold as day down the main street. He carried no rifle, only his knife, but his presence was a loaded gun. "Mercy!" a voice cried out. It was her aunt, her face white with shock. "They said you were... child. What are you doing?" But Mercy did not stop. She walked past her aunt, past the astonished face of her stepfather, past the mercantile. She stopped in the very center of the street, at the wooden crossroad, directly in front of the makeshift table where Raylan Pike was sitting with the cross-spur lawyer, sipping lemonade. Briggs and 3 of his mercenaries were there, their hands on their pistols. "Well, well," Raylan Pike said, his voice smooth and amused. He did not stand. He looked at Mercy as if she were a piece of dirt on his boot. The prodigal returns, and she brings her kidnapper with her. How convenient. Briggs, arrest this savage. He is not my kidnapper, Mercy's voice rang out, clear and sharp, cutting through the noise of the market. The crowd, smelling a confrontation, went silent. He is my protector. Pike laughed, a cold, dry sound. Protector. My dear girl, you are confused. This man, this thing, is the leader of the animals who raided the camel train and murdered our men. That is a lie, Mercy shouted, and her voice did not break. She had her audience. She had the entire town. She took a step forward, onto the small, raised platform used for auctions. Nantan stood at the base, his body perfectly still, his eyes scanning Pike, Briggs, the mercenaries. He was a guardian. You have been lied to, Mercy said to the crowd. All of you. She held up her hand. In it was the tarnished silver earring. This was found at the site of the camel raid. Does this look like the work of an Apache? This is Spanish silver, from a white man's ear. She held up the crumpled tax stamp. This is a freight tax stamp from the Cross Spur Company, found on the dynamite crates used to kill a railroad worker. Apache do not use dynamite from Cincinnati. She unrolled the last piece of proof, the crumpled map of the blasting charges. And this is the plan, not just to build a railroad, but to destroy Willow Wash, to blow up the sacred tombs of the Apache people, the tombs that have never harmed any of you. The crowd murmured, a low, uncertain sound. They looked at Pike. Pike smiled, his thin lips pulling back from his teeth. He stood up, slowly. My, what a performance. He turned to the crowd, his voice dripping with condescending pity. You see before you a poor, unfortunate girl. We all know her troubles. We all know her history. He let the insinuation hang. It seems her captivity has addled her brain. She has fallen for the savage. It is a sad, old story. He sneered at her. A girl who loves an Apache man. She has turned against her own kind for the affections of a redskin. The accusation was venomous. Mercy flinched, the color draining from her face. The women in the crowd clutched their children, their faces hardening. It was a charge she could not fight, an immoral failing that, in their eyes, invalidated everything else. That ain't true, Mercy stammered, her resolve cracking. It is true that she speaks for me, Nantan said. His voice was low, but it carried, a deep resonance that startled the crowd. He stepped onto the platform beside her. But she does not speak from love. She speaks from truth. And I speak for truth, too, a new voice said, a rough, grating drawl. A man pushed his way through the crowd. He was filthy, his arm in a crude sling, his face a mask of purple bruises and dried blood. It was Deeks. He limped to the platform, his one good eye fixing on Raylan Pike. Mr. Deeks, Pike said, his smile tightening. I thought you were in my employ, hunting this very man. You employed me, Deeks spat, pointing his good hand at Nantan. You employed me to hunt him, but Briggs, he employed me for something else. Briggs, who had been sneering, suddenly went rigid. What are you talking about, you drunk? Briggs blustered. I am talking about the camel raid, Deeks shouted. Turning to the crowd, I am talking about the extra $50, in company script to look the other way, while a few of Briggs's boys dressed up like Indians and shot up a pack train. I was there. I watched them. The crowd gasped. This was not an Apache. This was not a confused girl. This was one of their own, a bounty hunter, a man they all knew. He is lying, Briggs roared, his face turning a dark, mottled red. He is a drunken fool. Am I? Deeks sneered. Then why did you tell me to meet you at the old Johnson place? Why did you give me this? He held up a silver dollar. Briggs' panic was a palpable thing. He was a brute, not a schemer. He looked at Pike, but Pike's face was a cold, neutral mask. He had been cut loose. "You liar!" Briggs shouted, his hand instinctively going for his gun. He was not a good liar. He was a cornered animal. "And how about this?" Deeks said, his voice rising, playing to the crowd. "How do we know who you really work for, Briggs? How do we know you ain't just a company man in a militia badge?" "I am the law!" Briggs screamed, his composure shattering. "Then what is this?" Deeks lunged, grabbing Briggs's wrist with his good hand. Briggs yelped, trying to pull away, but Deeks was wiry and fast. With a sharp twist, Deeks ripped the heavy cuff of Briggs's canvas shirt. And there, on Briggs' forearm, for all the world to see, was a tattoo. It was crude, homemade, a dark blue-black. It was a simple brand, CS. Crossspur. A wave of understanding, of shock, passed through the crowd. He was branded. He was company property. Briggs, exposed, humiliated and terrified, snapped. He let out an animal roar, shoved Deeks to the ground, and pulled his revolver. He was not aiming at Deeks. He was aiming at Nantan. He was aiming at Mercy. He was aiming at the source of his humiliation. "No," a voice shouted. Briggs fired. The bullet went wide, striking the wooden post of the mercantile. Nantan did not charge. He did not pull his knife. He simply moved, pushing Mercy behind him, grabbing the heavy yoke of an ox cart that was sitting nearby. Briggs fired again, the bullet thudding into the wood. The crowd screamed, scattering, a mass of a panicking herd. Women and children fell. Then another sound cut through the air, louder than the gunshot, clearer than the screams. Bong! 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 It was the church bell. Father O'Rourke, who had run from the rectory when he heard the shouting, was in the bell tower, pulling the rope with all his might. It was not a call to prayer. It was a call to cease. It was an alarm, a sound that meant fire or flood, a sound that broke through the panic. The public clash had frozen. In that frozen moment, as Briggs stared, confused, at the church, Nantan threw the yoke. He did not throw it at Briggs's head. He threw it at his hand. The heavy wood spun, striking Briggs's wrist with a sickening crack. The revolver clattered to the dust. Briggs howled, clutching his shattered hand. Nantan did not move to finish him. He stood, his chest heaving, his discipline absolute. He had not killed. He had not drawn blood in anger. He had disarmed. He had shown his honor, in front of the entire town. Raylan Pike had not moved. He looked at the chaos, at his broken instrument, Briggs, at the furious face of Deeks, at the resolved faces of Mercy and Nantan. He looked at the crowd, which was no longer a confused herd, but an angry, suspicious mob. He raised his hands, his smile returning, calm and reassuring. "Enough," he called out, his voice cutting through the ringing of the bell. "This is a terrible misunderstanding. Father O'Rourke, please, stop that bell. This is a matter for the law, not for this." He gestured to the chaos. "Mr. Briggs," he said, his voice like ice, "you are relieved of duty. Men, take him. We will hold him for the magistrate." The two mercenaries, their faces grim, grabbed the weeping, cursing Briggs. "I apologize to you all," Pike said to the crowd. "It seems we have been misled by this man's zeal. Crossspur and Company wants only peace and progress. We will, of course, halt all operations. We will. Damn fan. We will negotiate. We will wait for the federal magistrate to arrive and sort this out." He sounded reasonable. He sounded official. The crowd, exhausted and confused, began to believe him. They wanted to believe him. "As for you," Pike said, looking at Nantan and Mercy, "this changes nothing. You are still squatting on company land, but in the interest of peace, I will allow you to return to wherever you came from. Go. We will speak tomorrow, when cooler heads prevail." He tipped his hat and walked toward the telegraph office, his lawyers flanking him. He had lost the battle, but he was already planning the war. The crowd began to disperse, muttering, helping the fallen, tending to the chaos. Father O'Rourke ran up to Mercy. "Child, you did it! You brought the truth!" But Nantan was watching Pike. He was watching the mercenaries who were arresting Briggs. He was watching the sky. And he saw the lie in Pike's retreat. "He is not negotiating," Nantan said, his voice low. "He is moving. He is not waiting for a magistrate. He is waiting for the dark." What Mercy said, confused. "He will not wait," Nantan said. "He lost his public battle. Now he will finish his private one. He will destroy the tombs tonight, before the magistrate can arrive, and then claim it was an accident, or that we did it." The cold dread returned. "What do we do?" "We stop him," Nantan said. A small group gathered in the shadow of the church as the sun began to bleed into the horizon. It was Nantan and Mercy. It was Father O'Rourke, his face grim. It was Deeks, who was cradling his broken arm but whose one good eye was burning. "I ain't done," he spat. "They owe me money, and I don't like being lied to." And there was another, small shadow. Maria. She had followed the crowd, seen Mercy, and come running. She stood beside Mercy now, her small hand clutching Mercy's skirt. "They will have a wagon," Nantan said. "The big one, with the dynamite. And they will have the mercenaries." "And they have Briggs," Deeks added. "He knows the way. He knows where the charges are set." "We cannot fight them," Father O'Rourke said, his voice heavy. "They are too many." "We do not fight," Nantan said. "We stop the wagon. We block the explosion. We are not warriors. We are protectors." He drew in the dust. A plan. A desperate one. Splitting the forces, Deeks, who knew the back roads, the priest, who could rally the few ranchers who hated Pike, Maria, who was small and fast, and Mercy and Nantan, who would go for the wagon itself. As they finalized the plan, Mercy looked at the sky. She was 19 years old. She was a runaway, and she was about to fight a railroad. "I am afraid," she whispered, her voice so low only Nantan could hear. "I am terrified. I have never been so afraid." He looked at her, the chaos of the day falling away. He saw her, not as a tool, not as a burden, not as a woman he loved in the white man's way. He saw her as the song had said. He saw her right. "You are afraid," he agreed. "But you are here. You are not a punishment, Mercy Quinn. No one is a punishment." He touched the clumsy yucca charm she had made, which he wore now on his belt. "You are a treasure to one who knows how to see." He did not touch her. He did not hold her. He simply saw her, and it was enough. As he spoke, the first drop of rain struck the dust at their feet, a dark, startled spot, then another, and another. A cold, unseasonable rain began to fall. It was not a storm, but a steady, soaking downpour. The sky opened up, washing the dust from the air, turning the streets to mud. Nantan looked up, a rare, hard smile touching his lips. The rain, on the driest day of the year. It was an omen. The land had chosen its side. It was standing with its keepers. The rain was a cold, hard blessing, turning the world to mud and noise. Under the cover of the storm and the darkness, Pike's men were moving. They were not waiting for negotiations. They were moving a single, heavy flat car loaded with crates of dynamite, pushing it onto the slight downgrade that led toward Willow Wash. Their plan was brutally simple. Push the car, let gravity take it down the slick rails, and let it smash into the bridge supports by the sacred caves. A catastrophic, anonymous act of progress. Nantan and Mercy saw it from the ridge. The wet lanterns of the mercenaries, a half-dozen of them, were a smear of yellow light in the downpour. "They will roll it," Nantan said, his voice a low growl, barely audible over the wind. "It will crash at the bridge, at the mouth of the tombs." "We have to stop the car," Mercy said, her voice shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, vibrating resolve. Nantan nodded. He looked at the track, at the men, at the curve ahead. He gave his orders. Deeks, his good arm useless, was sent to create a rock slide on the main road, to block any reinforcements. Father O'Rourke and Maria, small and unassuming, were to circle wide, to get as close to the tombs as possible. To bear witness, the priest had said. Nantan and Mercy were left with the car. I will draw them off. Nantan said. He grabbed a heavy piece of timber, a discarded railroad tie. You must get to the car, the iron lever on the side, the brake. Can you do it? She just looked at him and nodded. He was a phantom in the rain, a high, sharp whistle, the sound of a hawk, cut through the night from the rocks above the crew. A mercenary cursed, raising his rifle. What was that? Another whistle, from the other side. Nantan was throwing his voice, throwing stones. He was everywhere and nowhere. Two of the mercenaries, nervous, broke off to investigate, their lanterns swinging. Get the car moving, a voice shouted. It was Briggs. His arm was in a sling, his face a ruin. But he was there, overseeing the work, his pistol in his good hand. The remaining 4 men put their shoulders to the flat car. It groaned, the wheels resisting. Then, slowly, it began to roll. Now, Nantan whispered, appearing at Mercy's side. He moved first. He was not a shadow. He was a storm. He descended on the 2 men at the back of the car, using the heavy timber like a war club. It was a blur of motion, the sound of wood hitting bone, and 2 men were down. Briggs spun, roaring, firing his pistol into the dark. Mercy! Now the brake! Nantan yelled, drawing Briggs' fire. Mercy ran. She was no longer a girl in a calico dress. She was an arrow fired in the dark. She slid in the mud, her hands raw, and scrambled onto the moving flat car. The wood was slick with rain. The crates of dynamite were roped down. Dark, terrifying shapes. The car was picking up speed. She found the lever, a heavy iron bar. She grabbed it, but it was stiff with rust and disuse. She threw her entire weight against it, her feet slipping. Push! Damn you! Briggs screamed. Realizing what she was doing, he ignored Nantan and ran toward the car, his boots sucking in the mud. Mercy gave a desperate cry, a prayer and a curse, and pushed again. The lever gave. The brake shoes screamed against the wet wheels, a sound of metal torture. The slick rails did the rest, the locked wheels, the heavy, unbalanced load, and the sharp the curve, all met at once. The car shuddered, its wheels throwing sparks. And then, with a great, groaning tear of metal, it leaped from the tracks. It did not explode. It simply crashed, tilting, sliding a dozen yards in the mud. A broken whale, its deadly cargo spilled but safe. Mercy was thrown clear, landing hard in the muddy ditch. Briggs stopped, his face a mask of disbelief. His plan was ruined. He turned, his pistol raised, looking for Mercy, for Nantan, for anyone to kill. But Nantan was on him. He came not from the darkness, but from the bridge, a narrow, wooden span over the roaring, flash-flooded willow wash. He stood at the center, waiting. He had his knife, and he had his staff. Briggs, he called. Briggs saw him. This was the end. He ran onto the bridge, his pistol empty. He threw it at Nantan and drew his own long, heavy skinning knife. "I will kill you, you savage!" he screamed, his voice lost in the roar of the floodwater below. The duel was set. It was not a battle of tactics, it was a battle of rage. Briggs, fueled by his broken pride and his loyalty to Pike, charged Nantan, centered and cold. Met him. It was a clash of Gaegok Daungan, staff against knife. Nantan used his staff to parry, to block, to keep the brutes wild, slashing attacks at bay. The bridge was treacherous, slick with rain and mud. Briggs was stronger, but Nantan was faster. He moved with the water below him. He broke Briggs' charge, swept his leg, and sent him sprawling. Briggs slid, almost falling over the edge. Nantan did not strike. He waited. Briggs got up, his mask of rage replaced by fear. He lunged again, a desperate final attack. Nantan spun inside the lunge, brought his staff down on Briggs' good wrist, shattering it. The knife flew from his fingers. Briggs screamed, a high, thin sound, and lunged with his shoulder, grabbing Nantan, trying to pull them both over the edge. They struggled, slipping on the wet planks. Briggs, his balance gone, his body broken, slipped. He lost his grip on Nantan and fell backward, over the low railing, and vanished into the black, churning water. Nantan stood, breathing hard, looking at the spot where he had fallen. Then, he did not hesitate. He ran to the end of the bridge, grabbed a coil of rope left by the work crews, and began scanning the torrent. He would not let him die. He would pull him up, for trial. He was still searching when the world turned white. Raylan Pike had been watching from the ridge. He had seen the car derail. He had seen his last, best man fall from the bridge. His gamble was over. He was a man of cold logic, but now he acted from pure spite. He walked to the secondary cache of dynamite, the one his men had prepared earlier, closer to the caves. It was a smaller charge, but it was set against the unstable rock face. He lit the fuse and walked away. The explosion was not a boom. It was a deep, guttural whump that seemed to come from the bones of the earth. The entire cliffside shuddered. The sacred caves shake. Mercy had gotten to her feet. She was on the bank near the bridge, watching Nantan. When the explosion hit, she was thrown to the ground. She looked up, her ears ringing. The cliff above her was moving. A shower of small stones, then larger ones. She tried to scramble away, but her foot slipped into a crevice between two boulders, loosened by the blast. She pulled, but her ankle was wedged, trapped. She looked up in pure, animal terror. The main face of the rock was peeling away, a rock slide. "Nantan!" she screamed. He had seen it. He had seen her fall. He abandoned the rope, abandoned Briggs. He ran, not from the slide, but toward it. He reached her in 3 bounds. He did not try to pull her free. There was no time. He did the only thing he could. Nantan lunged, covering her body with his own. He wrapping his arms around her, shielding her head as the sky fell. This was the moment, the title. A rain of stone and shale hammered down on them, striking his back, his shoulders, his head. He grunted with the impacts, but he did not move. He was a shield of flesh and bone. Mercy was hysterical, trapped under him, the rock crushing her ankle, the sky falling, the noise of physical weight. "It is me!" she screamed, her voice muffled against his chest. "I am the punishment. I am the curse. It is my fault." He held her tighter, his body absorbing the blows. He put his lips to her ear, his voice a low, fierce growl against the thunder of the rocks. "No," he commanded. "No one is a punishment." The rocks crashed around them. He held her, his knuckles white, his body a fortress. "You are not," he gasped, a stone striking his shoulder hard enough to make him cry out. "You are seen. You are a treasure." He held her as if she was the only thing in the world worth saving. He held her like his only treasure, and in that moment, under the falling mountain, she finally believed him. Then, silence. Only the sound of the rain and their own ragged breathing. They crawled out. Nantan pulled his leg free from the pile of stones, his back a mass of bleeding cuts. He helped her, gently, agonizingly, to work her trapped ankle free. It was not broken, but badly sprained. She collapsed on the wet ground, shaking from shock, from cold, from the release of a life's worth of terror. Mercy trembling with shock. Nantan stood, looked at her shaking, and for a moment, he hesitated. Then he stripped off his heavy, soaked blanket, the one he had used to shield them, and he wrapped it around her shoulders. He did not touch her. He did not pull her close. He ju kwang kach. He kept his distance, giving her the space to own her own survival. His respect was as profound as his protection. A new light was joining the dawn, a flicker of orange. The explosion had started a fire, the dry brush at the mouth of the cave catching flame. As Nantan moved to fight it, figures emerged from the chaos. Father O'Rourke, his face grimed with soot, and Maria, her small hands clutching something. They had done it. They had gone into the cave before the collapse, and they had saved the sacred relics, the ancestors' medicine bundles. And then, Deeks. His good arm was wielding a wet saddle blanket, beating back the flames with a furious, redeeming energy. A man redeemed. The sound of a wagon, fast-moving, cut through the scene. A buggy, pulled by two fast horses, slid to a stop. Two men got out. One was a deputy. The other, in a clean black suit, was the district judge. He had arrived on a special train, summoned by Father O'Rourke's frantic telegraph from 2 days prior. "Father O'Rourke," the judge called out, his eyes taking in the derailed car, the smoking cliff, the small group of survivors. Pike and his remaining men were on the ridge, frozen. They had been caught. The legal unmasking. Father O'Rourke did not run to him. He walked, his steps measured. He was holding his own, the mercantile ledger book. He held it out to the judge. "In this book, Your Honor," the priest said, his voice raw, "you will find the shipping manifests for every stick of dynamite, every repeating rifle, and every gallon of whiskey, all billed to the Cross Spur and Company account." The drumbeat of the rain softened. It stopped. As Pike watched, trapped on his ridge, the first a cold, blue dawn broke over the scarred, muddy valley of Willow Wash. The fierce trial was convened not in a courthouse, but in the town's grain warehouse. It was the only building in Eden Draw large enough to hold the anger, the fear, and the sudden raw demand for justice. The entire town had gathered, their market day abandoned, their faces pale in the gray morning light. The smell of rain, mud, and raw grain filled the air. The judge, a man named Harlan, sat at a makeshift bench of stacked flour sacks. He was a federal magistrate, and his authority was absolute. Pike, his mercenaries, and Briggs, who had been pulled from the river half-drowned by Nantan and immediately handed to the judge's deputy, were under armed guard. Raylan Pike was no longer smiling. He had his lawyer, a man in a rumpled suit who had arrived on the same train as the judge, and the lawyer was already earning his fee. "Your Honor," the lawyer began, his voice a smooth, oiled machine, "this is a regrettable, but simple, matter. It is a racial conflict, escalated by vigilantes. My client, Mr. Pike, as a pillar of this community, was merely protecting the railroad's property from known hostiles." He gestured toward Nantan. "This savage and the clearly unstable, runaway girl he has brainwashed are responsible for the violence. They derailed a company flat car. They attacked Mr. Briggs." "That is not what Father O'Rourke's ledger suggests," Judge Harlan said, his voice as dry as the dust outside. "It suggests a conspiracy to commit fraud and, now, murder. I will hear from the girl. Miss Quinn, please stand." Mercy stood. Her dress was torn and caked in mud. Her hair was a wild tangle. Her ankle was wrapped in a strip of Nantan's blanket. She was 19 years old, and she looked ancient. She was terrified. She looked at Nantan, who stood against the wall, his arms crossed, his face impassive. Watching, he met her gaze and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "You are seen." She turned to the judge. "Miss Quinn," the judge said, his voice not unkind, "tell me what happened, from the beginning." And she did. The warehouse was so quiet, the only sound was her voice and the drip of water from the leaking roof. This was her gut-wrenching testimony. "It began with my stepfather. Sir," she said, her voice low but clear. He signed a paper, a marriage commitment, to a man named Dobbs. In exchange, Mr. Pike's mercantile would forgive his debt." The crowd murmured. Pike's lawyer leapt to his feet. "Objection, this is a private, family matter. It has no bearing." "It has every bearing," Mercy said, her voice rising. "Finding its strength." She looked at the lawyer, then at the judge. "It is the reason I ran, because I was being sold, because my whole life I was told I was a burden." She took a ragged breath, the confession tearing out of her. "My stepfather, he called me a punishment, a trial sent from God to test him. Oh, he said it so many times. I believed him." She looked at her stepfather, Abel, who was standing in the crowd, his face ashen, his eyes fixed on the floor. "I believed I was a curse," she continued, her voice thick with the shame she had carried, "that I brought ruin to everyone I touched. I ran to my aunt's, and Mr. Pike's men followed. They used my family's supply contract to force me to sign the paper or starve them. So I ran again." She turned her eyes on Raylan Pike, who stared back, his face a mask of cold fury. "But I was not the only one being sold," Mercy said. "The land was too. We found the camel raid. The tracks were not Apache. They were shod mules. The tobacco was from a store. We found the dead railroad worker. His body was staged, an Apache arrow put in him after he was dead. And we found the dynamite, cross-spur dynamite, to blow up the tombs at Willow Wash, to clear the land they had not yet even bought." "This is a fantasy," Pike's lawyer shouted. "A hysterical girl's story, fed to her by a savage." "Am I a fantasy?" a new voice growled. Deeks pushed his way forward, his broken arm in a sling, his face a ruin. "I was there. Briggs paid me $50 to look the other way while his men, dressed as Indians, shot up the pack train." "And am I a fantasy?" a small voice piped up. Maria, holding Father O'Rourke's hand, pointed a thin finger at Pike. "I saw him. I saw the man in the suit. He changed his clothes by the creek. He had the paint. And he dropped this." She held up the tarnished silver earring. "And this," Father O'Rourke said, stepping forward, holding his ledger. "Is this a fantasy? The freight manifests, the dynamite orders, the payments to Mr. Briggs, all from Pike's desk." "This is circumstantial," the lawyer yelled, but he was sweating now. "Is this circumstantial?" Mercy asked, her voice quiet. She pointed at Briggs, who was sitting, weeping, his entire body shaking. "Show them your arm. Mr. Briggs, show them the tattoo." Briggs looked up, his eyes wild with terror. The deputy holding him grabbed his uninjured arm and ripped the sleeve, just as Deeks had done. The tattoo CS was there, dark and permanent, a brand. The evidence of the crucifixion was complete. The stamp, the ledger, the testimony, the earring, the tattoo, the fake Apache web, was unraveled for all to see. Pike's lawyer sat down heavily. Judge Harlan looked at Raylan Pike. "Mr. Pike, do you have anything to say in your defense before I have you bound for a federal trial?" Pike was a statue. He had lost his empire, built on paper and lies, had been dismantled by a 19-year-old girl and a man he considered subhuman. His control was gone, and in the vacuum left by his control, there was only a vast, cold rage. Pike, he went mad. It was not a scream. It was a roar. He moved faster than anyone could have believed. He grabbed the pistol from his lawyer's forgotten satchel, a small, deadly derringer. He was not aiming for the judge. He was not aiming for Nantan. He was aiming for Mercy. He lunged, leveling the pistol, his thumb on the hammer. You punishment," he screamed. He never fired. A body slammed into him. It was Briggs. Briggs. The man saved from the flood. The man abandoned by his boss. The man Nantan had pulled from the churning water. No, Briggs screamed. his face a mask of pathetic, desperate, and final betrayal. No more. He crashed into Pike, his good shoulder striking the pistol arm. The gun went off, the bullet burying itself in a sack of grain. The two men fell, a tangle of suits and broken limbs. The deputies were on them in a second, dragging them apart. Briggs, on his knees, looked at the judge, his voice a broken wail. I did it all. The raid, the killing, the dynamite. He told me to Pike. He told me to do it all, he was confessing, trading his loyalty for a chance to live. I will testify. I will tell you everything. Just tell them I stopped him. I stopped him. Did not I? I get a chance to live. Tell me I get a chance to live. The warehouse was silent, utterly silent. Judge Harlan looked at the weeping Briggs, at the bound and snarling Pike, at his terrified, stunned town. He stood. This court is concluded, he said, his voice hard. Mr. Pike, Mr. Briggs, you are under arrest for conspiracy, incitement to riot, and murder. You will be transported to the federal prison to await trial. He turned to the railroad lawyer. The verdict of this hearing is as follows. The Cross Spur and Company's project at Willow Wash is hereby frozen, effective immediately. All explosives and equipment are seized. As evidence, a full inquiry into their contracts will be conducted. He looked at the crowd. Furthermore, this court orders immediate compensation to all landowners, including the family of Miss Quinn, who were defrauded or coerced by this company. And finally, he looked at Nantan. The ancestral lands at Willow Wash, the tombs, are hereby declared a protected site under federal observation. They are not to be disturbed, ever. He slammed his gavel, a simple hammer, onto the flour sack. It was done. The community looked back. There was no cheering. There was no applause. There was only the sound of men being led away, the clink of chains. The townsfolk looked at Mercy, at Nantan, at the floor, at their own hands. They had been fooled. They had been complicit. They saw, for the first of time, the shame in each other's eyes. This was not a victory. It was a reckoning. It was the first step of healing. As the crowd began to slowly, quietly disperse, Mercy stood, her entire body shaking from the release. She had won. She was free. She was alone. Nantan moved from the wall. He walked to her, through the scattering crowd. He did not say a word. He just stood in front of her, his presence a solid, warm thing in the cold, damp warehouse. He had been her shield. He had been her teacher. He had seen her. Her hand, chapped and raw and trembling, was at her side. She looked at his hand, strong, brown, scarred. This was her private moment, made public. She took the initiative. She was no longer a punishment. She was no longer a burden. She was a choice. She reached out, and her fingers found his. She took his hand. She did not grab it. She did not cling to it. She simply held it, her fingers interlaced with his. He looked down at their joined hands, a flicker of surprise in his dark eyes. Then his own fingers closed around hers, a firm, gentle pressure. In front of the judge, in front of the priest, in front of her stepfather, in front of the entire town, Mercy Quinn stood calmly and held the hand of the Apache warrior. And for the first time in her life, she was not a punishment. She was not a treasure. She was simply herself, and she was not afraid. The warehouse emptied slowly, leaving a vacuum in its wake. The trial had not brought relief, only a profound, collective exhaustion. The consequences settled on Eden Draw like a fine layer of new dust. People looked at each other differently, with suspicion but also with a dawning, shame-faced recognition. They realized that Pike's greed had not been aimed only at the Apache. Many families, like Mercy's, had been caught in the mercantile's web of debt. The inflated prices, the predatory loans, they had all been victims of price gouging. The anger that had been directed at the savages now turned inward, toward the systems that had so easily manipulated them. A week later, a new cooperative was formed by the local ranchers and farmers. They gathered, not in the saloon, but in the church hall. Their first resolution, proposed by a rancher Father O'Rourke had convinced to join their small band, was a public pledge. The new co-op would trade fairly with all, including the Apache, and it formally recognized the federal protection of Willow Wash. The condition of respecting the sacred land was the first line in their new charter. The judge's ruling was swift. Raylan Pike was bound for a federal trial he would not win. Briggs, for his confession and his final act of stopping Pike, was given a different sentence. He was not imprisoned. He was exiled. He was banished from the Arizona Territory for life. He left on foot, carrying nothing. His head bowed. He had taken responsibility, not for his soul, but for his life. He chose exile over a cage. And Deeks, the man who had lived by the gun, found a new path. His testimony had been crucial. The judge, seeing a man twisted by circumstance rather than inherent evil, offered him a choice jail for his bounty hunting, or service. Deeks chose service. He became a long-haul mail rider, carrying letters over the same desolate trails he had once hunted. He was atoning for his sins by connecting the very people he had once preyed upon. He was still a man of the wilderness, but now he carried news, not death. Mercy's first act of freedom was to go to her aunt's dugout. She did not go alone. Father O'Rourke and Nantan walked with her. Her stepfather, Abel, was there, packing his meager belongings. He could not look at her. "The shame," he whispered to the priest. "I am ruined." "No," Father O'Rourke said. "You are forgiven, but you are not welcome here." Abel left, a broken man, heading east, disappearing from their lives. Mercy turned to her aunt. "He is gone. You are safe." But her aunt was looking at the small, thin girl hiding behind Mercy. "This is Maria," Mercy said. "She has no one." "She has us," her aunt said, her voice firm, the thinness in her worn away by the past few days. She held out a hand to the girl. Maria would stay with Mercy's aunt, and she would go to school. Father O'Rourke became the mediator, the bridge between the two worlds. He organized meetings, not for law, but for sustenance. He was the one who arranged for the co-op to buy Apache tanned hides and, in return, provide the flour and sugar the old ways could not. A month passed. The scar on the land at Willow Wash began to heal, the rains having washed the mud and debris away. Leaving the earth clean, the Apache decided it was time. It was time for the land Thanksgiving. It was not a ceremony for the town. It was for them. They gathered at the mouth of the tombs, now cleared of rubble. The sacred, the relics, returned to their resting places. Nantan stood with the elder. They made their offerings, turquoise foam and sacred cornmeal, thanking the earth for its protection, for its omen. Mercy came. She did not come as a guest. She came to watch, to pay her respects. She stood at the edge of the circle, her head bowed, expecting nothing. She was an outsider. The elder, his ritual complete, turned his ancient eyes to her. He said nothing, but he gestured with his hand. He was inviting her in. Nantan watched as she hesitated. He walked to her, his hand offered, not as a command, but as a question. She took it. He led her into the circle. She was no longer an outsider. She belonged. The future was not built on grand gestures. It was built on survival. The seeds of livelihood were small. The first project was water. Nantan, with Mercy at his side, began building a series of simple, brilliant rainwater catches on the side of the mesa, channeling the precious water into a new cistern. Below it, they planted, not a farmer's field, but a garden of yucca, corn, and beans. The three sisters, the Apache way. The corn gave a stalk for the beans to climb. The beans fixed the nitrogen in the soil for the corn. The yucca, with its deep roots, held the earth together and gave its fiber. Mercy, whose hands had only ever known the toil of a white man's farm, now learned a new rhythm. An Apache woman, one who had first looked at her with hatred, now sat with her, teaching her. Mercy learned to weave the yucca fiber. Her hands, raw and chapped, slowly learned the intricate, strong knots. She was weaving her own life, fiber by fiber, into the life of this land. The inner storm was over. Mercy found she could breathe, the words her stepfather had branded her with. Punishment? Curse were just words. They were his words, not hers. They had no more power. She had been seen right, and in being seen, she had seen herself. Nantan, too, was changing. He had always been the lone warrior, the man who carried the burdens of his past and his people in silence. But he had not been able to save the tombs alone. He had not been able to stop Briggs alone. He had needed Mercy's voice. He had needed Deeks's testimony. He had needed the priest's ledger. He was learning to ask for help. He found himself talking to Father O'Rourke about the co-op. He found himself teaching Deeks the fastest way to cross the high passes, sharing his knowledge, trusting. He was no longer just a protector. He was becoming a partner. They were building a simple, one-room adobe cabin near the new garden, halfway between the town and the Apache camp. It was a home for no one, and for everyone. A meeting place. Mercy was helping Nantan square a new log for the small porch. It is heavy, he grunted, trying to lift it alone. Then do not lift it alone, she said, putting her own shoulder to the wood. Together, they raised it into place. He looked at her, a small smile touching his lips. He said, "Tomorrow." "Tomorrow," she agreed. "Tomorrow, we build the new porch." It was a simple promise. The Tuong Lai, the future, was not a grand vision. It was the next small thing. It was the next log, the next day's work, done together. That evening, the work was done. The sun was afire on the horizon. Mercy sat on the new, unfinished porch, her back against a post. Nantan sat on the steps, his back to her. The silence was comfortable, shared. He had the yucca flute, the clumsy, honest one she had first blown. He put it to his lips. There was not a crash, but a sigh. He played. It was the same reedy, ancient melody she had heard that first night, the sad song. But it was not sad anymore. It was just true. The notes of the yucca flute blended with the wind through the tall grasses. It was a single sound, made of two parts, man and land, Nantan and Mercy. No longer alone. The paper was rough, the ink was handmade from oak galls, but the letters were hers. Mercy Quinn sat at the new, smooth plain table in the cabin, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was not just reading her Bible anymore. She was writing her own testament. It had taken her weeks, practicing on slate with a piece of charcoal. But now she was setting it down. It was not a letter to anyone but herself. She finished, the nib of the pen scratching on the last word. She read it back, her lips moving, her own voice sounding strange in her head, reading her own thoughts. "I am not a punishment." She dipped the pen again and added, "I am a person who is trusted." Above her, Nantan was working. He was not weaving or hunting. He was carving. With the sharp tip of his knife, he was etching words into the heavy wooden beam that supported the roof of their shared cabin. The letters were not English. They were a phonetic representation of his own tongue, a way of making the abstract permanent. He was carving the words of the elder, the words he had first given to her by a small fire. Who is seen right, that person is a treasure. The words were now part of the house, a foundation holding up the roof above their heads. The Thetran, the town of Eden Draw, was a different place. The change was not loud. It was small, quiet, and profound. At the market day, there was a new stall. It was not a tent. It was a simple, beautiful blanket spread on the ground, where an Apache woman, the one who had taught Mercy, sat beside her. On the blanket were coils of dodet yucca fiber rope, woven baskets, and small, simple flutes. The ranchers, remembering the co-op's pledge, stopped. They looked, they traded, flour for baskets, tobacco for rope. It was not friendship, not yet, but it was a start. At the town hall, a new plaque had been fastened to the wall by order of Judge Harlan. It was a simple bronze square. It did not speak of war or murder. It stated in plain legal text, the federal pact protecting the ancestral lands of Willow Wash, that the ancient tombs were not to be trespassed upon. The law, which had been a weapon, was now a shield. Nantan came to Mercy on an evening when the sky was a bruised purple, the color of a fresh turquoise stone. He did not kneel. He did not have flowers. This was a proposal of the New West, not the Old World. He sat beside her on the porch, not in the comfortable silence, but in a new, charged one. "The garden is good," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "The beans are climbing." "The house is strong," he said. "Yes, the roof does not leak." He was silent for a long moment. Then he reached into the small pouch at his belt, the one she had woven for him, and took something out. He placed it in her open palm. It was a ring. It was not a Kim Kwong, no diamond. It was a simple, heavy band of hammered silver, and set in it was a single, sky-blue piece of turquoise. It was the color of the sky after the rain. "This is not a chain," he said, his voice rough. "It is not a debt. It is not a trade." He looked at her, his dark eyes holding hers, seeing her right. "It is a circle, for a partner." Mercy looked at the ring, the weight of it solid in her palm. Her eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow or fear, but of a quiet, profound joy. This was not a man taking on a burden. This was not a man buying a wife. This was a man asking for an equal. Consent. It was the one thing she had never been offered, and the only thing that mattered. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, a partner." He did not slide the ring onto her finger. He waited. She, with her own hand, picked up the heavy silver ring and pushed it onto the fourth finger of her left hand. It was a perfect fit. They were married a week later. It was not a wedding of the church. It was not a ceremony of the Apache. It was both. Father O'Rourke stood on the steps of the new cabin. The elders stood beside him. The blessing was given by both communities. Her aunt was there, her cousin Thomas and Maria, holding Mercy's hand. Deeks was there, on his way north, his mailbag at his feet. He had ridden 2 days out of his way to nod his respect. The future was not a mystery. It was a plan. The door to the future was the shared school. It was their next project. "It cannot be just for the town children," Mercy insisted, sitting with the priest and Nantan. "And it cannot be just for the Apache children," Nantan stated. "They must all learn, but they must learn both ways." The plan was simple. The school would be held in the church hall, but also at the cabin at Willow Wash. The priest, Maria, who was now reading voraciously, and Mercy would teach reading, writing, and arithmetic. But Nantan would teach the other half. He would teach the reading of tracks, the language of the birds, the respect for the land that had saved them. It would be a school for children and adults, a place to learn not just how to survive, but how to live together. The land itself seemed to approve. The promise of peace was written in water. The unseasonable rains had done more than wash away the mud. They had filled the springs. Willow Wash, the dry creek, flowed again. It was not a river, but a clear, shallow stream, a metaphor that the land itself had forgiven the sins of the people who lived on it. The final scene came on a day like any other. The sun was setting, bleeding gold, and rose into the canyons. The dusk was a blessing. Mercy was standing on the porch, looking out at the new thin line of water, at the dark, peaceful shapes of the sacred tombs, now safe. Nantan came up behind her. He did not speak. He just stood there. She leaned back, mercy resting her forehead against the solid warmth of his chest. His arms came around her, a light, protective embrace. It was not the grip of possession. It was not the desperate, shielding clutch from the rock slide. It was a mutual support. They stood as one, holding each other up, two pillars of the same strong house. The echo was the sound that carried on the cooling air, distant flute music. It was Nantan's song, but he was not playing it. It was Thomas, her cousin, sitting by the creek, practicing on the simple yucca flute Nantan had carved for him. The tune was clumsy, but it was honest. This was not a love born of first glances or whispered promises in a ballroom. This was a love, born from a shared purpose and a profound respect. It was not a fairy tale. It was humane, warm, and real. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please let us know in the comments where you are listening from. We would love to connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales. Give this video a like and support us by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.